Welcome to the weekly report. It's April 29 and I'm Robert Barwick. I'm joined today by CEC founder and leader Craig Isherwood. How are you, Craig?
A little bit under the weather, Robbie.
All right, we'll go easy on you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. In today's weekly report, first, Anglican depopulators are not Christians. And second, it's not inflation, it's hyperinflation. So, Anglican depopulators are not Christians. This week, there were headlines in all the papers about a call by the Anglican Public Affairs Commission for the baby bonus to be scrapped. Now, for all those people out there who might think that's a good idea for your own reasons, you know, all the people who tend to think, oh yeah, we don't want to encourage unmarried mothers to have babies, etc. That's a good call. That's not why the Public Affairs Commission made the call. They've made the call on population control grounds. They see it as encouraging Australia's population growth, which should be reduced. It was one of a number of calls the Anglican Public Affairs Commission made to the Sustainable Population Strategy for Australia inquiry that is currently being undertaken by Sustainable Population Minister Tony Burke. This is the man, remember, whose job was created by Fabian Society member Julia Gillard when she said we want a sustainable population ministry. So that's Tony Burke's job. What he's doing with that ministry is he's using it to shut down the Murray-Darling Basin Food Bowl, which provides the food for the Australian population. This inquiry is being run by people such as Bob Carr, the former Premier of New South Wales. He's one of the commissioners on this inquiry, who is a notorious, he's known as the Malthus of Maroubra, a notorious depopulator in Australia. So this crowd of Anglicans has made their submission to this body. The tone has even freaked out the leadership of the Anglican Church. Anglican leaders, religious leaders yesterday were distancing themselves from this, saying, no, we are not in favour of scrapping the baby bonus. Maybe they're just afraid of the controversy that it's caused, but that's actually what they said. The only public figure of note who's come out endorsing this call this week is Tony Windsor, the independent member for New England, who roundly said definitely the baby bonus should be scrapped. Now, here's the point with this particular call, though. This is a submission, and I've got the submission here that this Anglican Public Affairs Commission has made to this inquiry. It parades as Christian, hence, which people just, most people assumed it was the Anglican Church itself making this call, but it's not. This commission, Public Affairs Commission, goes to great lengths to say we are doing this as the advisory body of the Anglican Church, but not with the authority of the Anglican Church. They parade as Christian, but their Christian message in this submission is at best schizophrenic. It's actually quite contradictory. To give you an example, the submission has two parts. The first part, attachment A, is a statement from a resolution by the Anglican General Synod called Care for the Creation, the Need to Acknowledge and Respond to Population Issues. And in that resolution from 21st of September 2010, they start off by saying, Synod acknowledges, A, that all human life comes from God, irrespective of age, gender, race, or ability, and that God does not delight in the death of any he has made. So that's point A. But in point B2, the Synod says that unless human beings take responsibility for nature, then the biggest catastrophe we face is too many human lives that they already define as having come from God. They repeatedly say overpopulation, or too many of these God-created human lives, is the biggest problem facing the world. So if that's not schizophrenic, I don't know what is. Once you wade through the religious trappings, though, of this submission, which, you know, at best I think they've put on there just to qualify as being an Anglican submission. This whole submission by this body has nothing to do with Christianity. It is based on some of the most evil activism, anti-population activism that is underway in Australia right now. Specifically, it is mainly based on the book written by Mark O'Connor and William Lyons called Overloading Australia. And it's footnoted repeatedly and referenced repeatedly in this submission. Okay, Mark O'Connor is a founder of Sustainable Population Australia, which is the spin-off from Prince Philip's Australian Conservation Foundation. He is a founder of it. What's their policy on population? 1, a Chinese-style one-child policy. They want it dictated that Australians can only have one child because we're overpopulated. 2, they want an immigration program that is stripped right back to be only have enough immigrants come in so that Australia's population can remain steady and not grow. But with the added proviso that immigration should not be from developing countries. Why? Because as O'Connor and Lyons explicitly say, if immigrants come from developing countries, they come from an economy where they have low consumption to a first world economy where they have higher consumption, and that total overall consumption of human beings on the planet therefore rises, and it's that human consumption which is what's destroying the earth. And so they are advocating a racist immigration policy to achieve their environmental objectives here. This is the book, by the way, that Dick Smith paid the entrepreneur, Craig Isherwood's combatant on population issues, paid to have distributed to every member of Parliament in Australia about 18 months ago. And I just want to further add, William Lyons, Mark O'Connor's co-author, now Mark O'Connor is some kind of self-styled poet. William Lyons is a professional writer. He's the writer of a book I've highlighted here in the past, Patriots, Defending Australia's Natural Heritage. William Lyons is one of the most shocking people you will ever read. He is the epitome of the anti-human greenie. His fanatical hatred of everything that's human, and explicitly human nature, the ability of human beings to make discoveries and human creativity, it saturates all his writings. He has a fanatical hatred for it, and it's shocking to read it in his material. And if you don't believe greenies like this exist, read his stuff. This is the body of work that a religious group, or by a nominally religious group, this Anglican Public Affairs Commission, has based their submission on population issues on. So, Craig, my question to you is, why is a church being used to promote such an evil, anti-human agenda?
Well, Robbie, this is not the first time the church has been used for some pretty horrendous programs. I mean, many disastrous and genocidal activities have always been done in the name of the church. But what is really interesting is when you look at this particular proposal by the Anglican Public Affairs Commission, which is an official commission of the Anglican Church, what stares at you is the difference between what we talked about last week with the Catholic Church and this particular statement by the Anglican Church. And the difference comes down to the issue of a principle, right? The Catholic Church has come out denouncing the euthanasia debates and the actual eugenic policies that are pervading Australian culture from the principle that human beings are created in the image of the Creator, that we are endowed with creativity that makes us in the image of the Creator, and we live in a universe that is in fact creative. Now, this is not a religious idea. It's a scientific principle that we as human beings can make discoveries of how the universe works by looking at what impinges our senses and looking for the paradoxes that come from those senses, and then discovering the actual physical principles that come in. Now, if we embrace that ability to make those discoveries as human beings, then we can transform the environment, the society we live in, for the future generations, for posterity, right? So that's what our role is. That's what makes us uniquely human beings. Now, whilst you get the cover language within the Anglican proposals and so forth, what you don't hear is that specific statement of principle. It's covered in like nouns or sophistries. It's what we call British liberalism or nominalism. In other words, the words sound good, but they are actually empty. They don't mean anything because you're not stating principle. And what you find is the church has always been used as a battleground for much more evil intent. And the fact that the Anglican Church has come out, or at least this part of the Anglican Church has come out and made this submission, is not surprising at all. You have to look, well, who is the head of the Anglican Church? It's the monarch, right? The Queen of England. Who is her royal consort? Prince Philip. Prince Philip is the leading world's genocidalist, pushing for a reduction of the world's population, where he has said on numerous occasions, as we've reported, that he wants to see the reduction of the world's population from 7 billion down to below 2 billion. Now, isn't that lawful? Well, of course it is. What also is the monarch? The monarch represents the concept of the empire, the British Empire, that we've talked a lot about, and we're actually in a war against. Now, the British Empire is like all empires. It embraces this oligarchical principle, which is the principle of denying human creativity. Or you can also talk about this idea of the Promethean principle, where Prometheus was persecuted as a figure of Greek mythology because he gave man fire. Fire meaning knowledge, right? Or in our case, it also can directly relate to the idea of giving mankind access to nuclear power and to nuclear fission, but access to scientific development. And what is also very interesting about the historical relationship of churches is that they've always been used by oligarchs to destroy human development. Now, what happened with the Anglican, or how was the Anglican Church, or the Church of England, first formed? That's really a very interesting historical development, because you have to go back to the period of France under Joan of Arc, right, where he have a young peasant girl that stood up to the king and basically said, "King, you're not doing the job correctly. You need to be a dignified king." So she fought for France, for France to be a nation state. And she was despised by the oligarchical factions within her own country and was burnt at the stake at 19. But because she had a mission and devoted her life to that fight, that then inspired actually areas of the Catholic Church at that time. So by 1432 you had the Council of Florence, led by the great Nicholas of Cusa, who developed the concept of imago viva Dei, man in creating God's image. And Capac stated the idea that human beings made in the image of God should participate in God's creation and develop science and technology. He was the founder of modern science, going back into 1432.
They made religious ideas intelligible in a way that, when applied, it benefited the general welfare of people.
Yeah, that's why Nicholas of Cusa was seen as the founder of modern science, because through the application of science, you could, as you say, develop the future abilities for society to develop. Also, Nicholas of Cusa developed the idea of the nation state, that nation states exist for the benefit of the development of those people. And then you had under King Louis XI of France. Remember, this is the same France from Joan of Arc, from 1423 to 1483, developed the first modern nation state on that principle. And then what happened? It spread. It was becoming infectious. You had that spread to the second modern nation state, which was actually established under King Henry VII, of England. So here you had King Henry VII of England establishing the same principles, developing infrastructure, developing the means to support the population through agriculture and so forth. And it saw a great revival of the physical economy of England in that period under Henry VII. Now, this had to be stopped. It had to be stopped at all costs, right? So then you had the Venetian operation, because the Venetians were quite strong at this period of time. They had to stop this, so they created, in a sense, the Reformation. And then they had an agent, a sex fiend, right, who liked to have all sorts of sexual exploits, called Henry VIII. A real disgusting individual. Now, he was counselled by Francisco Zorzi, a Venetian operative, and he wanted to get out of a marriage with Catherine of Aragon to marry Anne Boleyn, whom he had fallen in love with, and he was, I think, also suffering pretty badly from syphilis at that stage, so he had mental problems as well. But he was a nut. So he was manipulated into actually creating the Church of England. And through the Acts of Supremacy of 1534, he said, I am the supreme ruler of England. I am the supreme religious ruler. And that created enormous tensions, of course, at that particular time. And one of the key guys that was actually recognised by Pope John Paul II in 2000 was Sir Thomas More. Because Sir Thomas More had developed himself, had understood what took place under Henry VII. And Sir Thomas More stood up against King Henry VIII on what Henry VIII was trying to do, because he thought that the splitting of the church for these political reasons and personal reasons was an absolute disaster for mankind. Anyway, Henry VIII had him executed, beheaded, and his head stuck up on a pike. But from that point forward, what you also had was, because King Henry VIII had created this separate church, you had the formalisation of the Reformation at that period. So you had two branches of the church. And for the next 100 years, you had nothing but religious warfare between the two branches of the church. And so that's what you've got today.
Yeah, and the religion was deployed by these imperial forces.
Yes, it's like he and you fight, and the third party, which is the Venetians, will just sit back and watch you guys fight. Well, that's the same methodology today. So what you see with these commissions and so forth using the church is that they're pushing another agenda. They're pushing this depopulation agenda on behalf of the oligarchy.
Well, on behalf of the Crown, because this kind of sustainable population stuff is Prince Philip's operation. Yeah. And Prince Philip's operation, like Henry VIII 400 years ago, is using the church to push his imperial agenda.
Well, that's right, and these institutions get corrupted this way. The good thing, though, is that human beings can actually still recognise that they're created imago Dei, regardless of the churches they happen to find themselves in, and then stand up and actually fight for the principle. So, I mean, we have written a lot about the history of these particular religious fights and the history of the church, and these great figures that come up like Joan of Arc, of Thomas More and so forth, because they represent the people, the great souls of history that have fought for principle. So, I mean, people can't understand really, just by looking at these submissions, what the heck's going on, that there's a deep political, historical agenda, and that's why we have our publications available for people to really get to understand more than just the surface phenomenon.
All right. Okay. All right. In the time we've got left, number 2. It's not inflation, it's hyperinflation. So the inflation spike that was reported in Australia this week is a total lie. First lie. Forget the 3.3% inflation, which was reported as a shock. That might be a shock to the statisticians, but there's no way inflation in Australia is 3.3%. It is more like well over 20%. If inflation was measured the way it was back in the 1970s, when it regularly used to run at 10, 11 and 12%, it would be well over 20%. They've changed the way they've measured it, and so we now have a consumer price index that records inflation, which is very, very heavily weighted down with luxury items like high technology plasma televisions that come down in price and don't go up in price, and that makes us look like everything's hunky-dory. In terms of the essentials that actually define the cost of living, it's going through the stratosphere. So the 3.3% is a lie. The second lie is the spike that is being noticed is not caused by the Queensland floods. Forget the fact that bananas have gone to up 100% because the crop was wiped out. That's not what's the price rise of bananas is not what's driving the cost of living crisis in Australia. We've had a cost of living crisis for quite a few years now. The Queensland floods were only from December onwards. The real issue and the real driver of this inflation is that it is financial hyperinflation, and that means it's driven by money printing by central banks to prop up their bankrupt banking system. So Craig, isn't this hyperinflation we're seeing exactly what Lyndon LaRouche forecast at least 5 years ago?
Yes, Robbie, look, nothing's changed. We're still, since the global financial crisis, nothing has changed. We still have a massive amount of speculative debt and speculation taking place, and consequently this is what's driving the inflation figures up. It's driving the demand on the Australian dollar, which has now gone to 1.09 cents US. Now, we have to understand that Australia is a major part of the international carry trade. And the carry trade is where countries, people, institutions, hedge funds, they buy currencies in cheap, like US dollars, and they buy into the Australian dollar, right, in order to make a profit on the interest rates. Like you can get money from the United States at 0.25% interest, but you bring it to Australia, you invest in the Australian markets, you end up with something over 6 to 7%, right?
At a minimum.
At a minimum. That's a very minimum, right? Now, the interesting thing is that when the Australian dollar starts to become more expensive, how do we hang on to, or how do we provide for the enormous debt that we have internally within our economy? Well, we have something like $1 trillion of overseas debt, of which a lot of it is stuck in our banks. Something like $800 billion is in our banks.
They owe it.
They owe it to external forces. So how do we keep attracting investment in this country? Well, we have to keep increasing the interest rates, right? And this excuse of inflation is used to keep bumping up the interest rates. It's absolutely absurd that bananas from Queensland somehow impinge upon the multi-quadrillion dollar speculative industry, financial industry in the world today. And what you see consequently is the desperation of continuing the bubble, making sure the bubble continues to grow. Now, the increase in the Australian dollar is not because our dollar is strong.
No.
It's because the US dollar, the reserve currency, has collapsed. It's become so weak. The internal physical economy of the United States is dying, it's disintegrating.
And the money printing is being done in US dollars.
And and Bernanke, this qualitative easing 1, 2, and possibly 3 or 10 or zillion or whatever he's going to get to, they just literally crank up the printing presses, electronically or physically, and they're producing $800 billion, which of course gets put into the markets. It artificially inflates the stock market over there. And then you get this ridiculous scenario where, the markets have gone up in the US and people think therefore their markets should go up in Australia. And this global casino economy based upon pure speculation. But the point that Mr. LaRouche makes, and he makes it in every weekly report he does on his LPAC site, is that the system itself is finished. What we have is this hyperinflation of the currency, of the monetary supply, at the same time that the physical economy is falling through the floor. That is, we're not investing in infrastructure. That is the necessity for high quality rail systems, water systems, education. I mean, in the United States, it is literally sacking hundreds of thousands of teachers. They're shutting down NASA, the development of real science and technology for the future. And again, in the other issue that we're confronted with now as people on the face of the planet is that our Earth itself is now going through massive changes, which has been reflected in the enormous increase in earthquake activity. And also you see these horrendous tornadoes in the United States now. These are a phenomenon because of the changes that are taking place as our Earth is travelling through the galaxy. And what are we actually doing to protect ourselves and to develop the necessary capability to respond to these sorts of things? Very little. Instead, we're fixated on this idiot called money, and we're trying to promote and prop up a disastrous parasitical system. The only solution to this is what we've proposed, what Mr. LaRouche has proposed, is the Glass-Steagall, where we go back to a policy of getting rid of the speculative debt, put it aside, quarantine it, protect the banking system, and those banks that are involved the merchant banks and whatever that are involved in speculative debt, well, they can have their debt, but don't ask the taxpayers to pay for it. But you protect the commercial banks and the retail banks in our country such that they are re-regulated to actually support the development of the physical economy, the real things that we actually need. So, I mean, it is what LaRouche's forecast 5 years ago. Mr. LaRouche is more correct now than he was 5 years ago because history and time has played it out to meet specifically what he was forecasting.
All right, Craig, thanks. Okay, so that's been the weekly report for today. As I've stated here before, remember this is not just for information, this is a fight. Further to what Craig said, the Glass-Steagall bill is back before the US Congress in the form of a House resolution. If that gets passed, and it's up to sort of a global effort to put the pressure on to do that, all of this can start being addressed, and it's the only way it will be addressed. The Anglican Church issue is part of the population war on which we are the other side. The CEC represents the opposition to that. So you know the information, join the fight and get in touch with us. Call our toll-free number, 1-800-636-432. Got it? You know, look at the information on the website that tells you how to get involved. Subscribe to our literature. And while you're doing that, stay tuned on this channel for more weekly reports. Thanks.